Class 12, Chapter 12 Ecosystem. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a largest forest or a sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem as a composite of all local ecosystems on earth. Since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories, namely the terrestrial and aquatic. Forest, grassland, and deserts are some examples of terrestrial ecosystem. Pond, lake, wetland, river, and estuary are some examples of aquatic ecosystem. Crop field and an aquarium may also be considered as a man-made ecosystem. We will first look at the structure of ecosystem in order to appreciate the input, productivity, transfer of energy, food chain, web, nutrient cycle, and the output regarding the energy loss. We will also look at the relationship cycles, chains, webs that are created as a result of these energy flows within the system and their interrelations. 12.1 Ecosystem Structure and Function. In earlier classes, you have looked at the various components of environment, abiotic and biotic. You have studied how the individual biotic and abiotic factors affected each other and their surroundings. Let us look at these components in more integrated manner and see how the flow energy take place within these component of the ecosystem. Interaction of abiotic and biotic component result in a physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. Vertical distribution of different species occupy different level of stratification. For example, trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of a forest. Shrubs, the second, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layers. The components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider following aspects. First, productivity; second, composition; third, energy flow; and fourth, nutrient cycle. To understand the ethos of an aquatic ecosystem, let us take a small pond as an example. This is fairly a self-sustained unit and rather simple example that explain ever the complex interactions that exist in an ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic or organic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length, and the other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function and the entire pond. The autotrophic component include the phytoplankton and some algae, the floating, submerged, and marginal plant found at the edges. The consumers were represented by the zooplankton, the free swimming, and the bottom dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all the function of an ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole. Conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun by the autotroph. Consumption of the autotroph by heterotrophic decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back for refuse by the autotroph. These events are repeatedly over and over again. There are unidirectional movement of energy toward the higher trophic level and its dissipation and loss as a heat of environment. 12.2 Productivity. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement for any ecosystem to functional sustainability. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in term weight or energy. The rate of biomass productivity is called productivity. It is expressed in term gm square or yr square. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it can be divided into gross primary productivity GPP and primary productivity NPP. Gross productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by plant in respiration. Gross productivity minus respiration loss is is the net primary productivity NPP. GPP minus R is equals to NPP. Net productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, herbivores, and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrients, and photosynthetic capability of plant. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystem. The annual primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons of organic matter. Of this, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans only 55 billion tons. The rest, of course, is on land. Discuss the main reasons for the low productivity of oceans with your teacher. 12.3 Decomposers. You may have heard of the earthworm being referred as a farmer's friend. This is so because they help in the breakdown of complex organic matter as well as in losing of the soil. Similarly, decomposers break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, nutrients, and the process is called decomposition. Dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, flowers, and dead remain of the animals, including facial matter, constitute detritus, which is the raw material for decomposer. The important step in the process of decomposition and fragmentations, leaching, catabolism, humidification, and mineralization. Detritivores, example earthworm, break down detritus into small particles. This process called fragmentation. By this process, leaching water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salts. Bacteria and fungal enzymes degrade detritus into simple inorganic substance. This process called catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on detritus. Figure 12.1 Humidification and the mineralization occur during decomposition in the soil. Humidification lead to accumulation of a dark color atmosphere substances called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergo decomposition at an extreme slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a surveyor of nutrient. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of inorganic nutrient occur by the process known as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. The rate of decomposition is called controlled by chemical composition of detritus and climatic factor. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin and quicker. If detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substance like sugar, temperature, and soil moisture are the most important climatic factor that regulate decomposition through their effect on the activities of soil microbes. Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas high temperature and anaerobics inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic matter. Figure 12.1 Diagrammatic representation of composition cycle in terrestrial ecosystem. 12.4 Energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of its photosynthetically active radiation PAR. We know that plant and photosynthetic bacteria autotroph fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic material. Plant capture only 2 to 10% of the power, and this small amount of energy sustain the entire living world. So it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by plant flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are depend for their food on producer either directly or indirectly. So you find an unidirectionally flow of energy from the sun to producers and then composer. Is this in keeping with the first law of thermodynamics? Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require to contract the universal tendency toward increased disorders. The Green plant in the ecosystem are called producer. In terrestrial ecosystem, major producer are the herbivores and woody plants. Likewise, producer in an aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplankton, algae, and higher plants. You have read about the food chain and webs that exist in nature starting from the plant or producers. Food chains or rather webs are formed such that an animal's feed or an animal or on another animal and in turns is food for another. The chain is formed because of the independency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer hence is either passed on to the consumer or the organism died. Death of organism is the beginning of the detritivore food chain. All animals depend on plants directly or indirectly for their food needs. They are hence called consumers and also heterotrophs. If they feed on the producers, the plants, they are called primary consumers, and if the animals eat other animals which in turn eat the plants or their produce, they are called secondary consumers. Likewise, you could have tertiary consumers too. Obviously, the primary consumer will be herbivores. Some common herbivores are insects, birds, and mammalian in terrestrial ecosystem and molluscs in aquatic ecosystem. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are carnivores, or more correctly, primary carnivores. Highly secondary consumer, those animals that depend on the primary carnivores for food, are labeled secondary carnivores. A simple case in food chain is depicted below. Grass to goat men. The detritus food chain DFC begin with a dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They made their energy and nutrient by degrading the dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as septotrophs. To decompose, decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste material into simple inorganic material which are subsequently absorbed by them. In an aquatic ecosystem, GFC is the major conduct for energy flow. As is against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through the detritus food chain than brought the GFC. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some level. Some of the organisms DFC are prey to the GFC animals. And in a natural ecosystem, some animals like cockroaches, crows, etc. are carnivore. These natural interconnection of food chain make it a food web. How would you classify human beings? Organisms occupy a place in a natural surrounding or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms based on the source of nutrient for food. Organisms occupy a species place in a food chain that is known as the trophic level. Producers belong to the first trophic level, herbivores to the second, and carnivores to the third. Figure 12.2 diagrammatic representation of trophic level in an ecosystem. The important plant to note that the amount of energy decrease at successive trophic level. When any organism die, it is converted to detritus or dead biomass that serve as a energy source for decomposer. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demand. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living organisms at a particular time called as standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organisms or the number of unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight measured by measurement of biogas in terms of dry weight in more aquatic. Why the number of trophic level is the grazing food chain is restricted as the transfer of energy flows 10% only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In energy, it is possible to have many levels: producers, herbivores, primary carnivores, secondary carnivores in the grazing food chain. Figure 12.3. Do you think that there is any such limitation in a detritivore food chain? Figure 12.3. Energy flows through different trophic levels. 12.5. Ecological pyramid. You must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. The base of the pyramid is broad and it narrow towards the apex. One get a similar shape whether you express the food or energy relationship between organisms at different Trophic level. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass, or energy. The base of the each pyramid represents the producer or the first trophic level, while the apex represents tertiary top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramid that are usually studied: A pyramid for number, B pyramid for biomass, C pyramid for energy. For detail, see figure 12.4 A, B, C, and D. Figure 12.4a pyramid of number in a grassland ecosystem. Only their three top carnivores are supported in an ecosystem based on production of nearly 6 million plants. 12.4b pyramid of a biomass shows a sharp decrease in biomass at higher trophic level. 12.4c inverted pyramid of biomass. Small standing crop of phytoplankton support large standing crops of zooplankton. Figure 12.4d an ideal pyramid of energy. Observe that plant produce convert only the energy in a sunlight available to them to NPP. Any calculations of energy content, biomass, or number has to include all organisms that trophic level. Known generalization we make it will be true if we take only a few individuals at any trophic level into account. Also, a given organism may occupy more than one trophic level simultaneously. One must remember that the trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in same ecosystem at one time. For example, a sparrow is the primary consumer when it eats seeds, fruits, peas, and a secondary consumer when it eats insect worms. Can you work out how many trophic level human beings function at in a food chain? In most ecosystem, all the pyramids of number of energy and biomass are upright. Producers are more in number and biomass than the herbivores, and herbivores are more in number and biomass than the carnivores. Also, energy of at the lower trophic level is always more than at a higher level. There are exceptions to this generalization. If you were to count the number of insects feeding on a big tree, what kind of pyramid would you get? Now add an estimate of the number of small birds depending on the insect as also the number of larger bird eating the smaller. Draw the shape you would get. The pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted because the biomass of fishes far exceeds that of phytoplankton. Isn't that a paradox? How would you explain this? Pyramid of energy is always upright, can never be inverted because when energy flows from a particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost as a heat at each step. Each bar in a energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy represent each trophic level in a given time or annually per time. However, there are certain limitations of ecological pyramid, such as it does not take into account the same species belonging to or more trophic level. It assumes a simple food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. It does not accommodate a food web. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramid, even though that they play a vital role in the ecosystem. Summary: an ecosystem is a terrestrial, functional, and structural unit of nature, and it is comprised abiotic and biotic components. Abiotic components are inorganic matter, air, water, and soil, whereas biotic components are producer, consumer, and decomposers. Each ecosystem has characteristic physical structure resulting from the interaction among abiotic and biotic components. Species composition and stratifications are the two main structural features of an ecosystem based on source of nutrient. Every organism occupies a place in an ecosystem. Productivity, composition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling are the four important components of an ecosystem. Primary productivity is the rate of capture of solar energy or biomass productivity of the net primary productivity NPP, rate of capture of the solar energy or the net primary productivity. Total productivity of organic matter is called GPP. NPP is the remaining biomass or the energy left after utilization of producers. Secondary productivity is the rate of assimilation of energy by the consumers. In decomposition, complex organic compound of detritus are converted to carbon dioxide, water, and organic nutrient by the decomposition. Decomposition involves three processes, namely fragmentation or detritus leaching and catabolism. Energy flows is unidirectional. First, plants capture solar energy, and then food is transferred from the producer to decomposer on organisms for different trophic level in nature and connected to each and movement of nutrient elements through a various components of the ecosystem is called nutrient cycle. Nutrients are repeatedly used through this process. Nutrient cycling is of two types, gaseous and sedimentary. Atmosphere or hydrosphere is the reservoir for the gaseous type of cycle carbon, whereas the earth crust is the reservoir for sedimentation type phosphorus. Product of ecosystem process are named as ecosystem service, product purification of air water by forest.